So good morning, everyone, and I'd now like to call to order this meeting of the Human Resources Governance and Stakeholder Relations Committee of Waterfront Toronto. And I've been advised that we have a quorum, so it's appropriate to proceed. So firstly, a warm welcome to all of you who are joining our meeting today. We appreciate your interest and participation. And I'd also like to remind you that the open session of today's meeting is being recorded and will be posted for public to view. So first, before we get into the business of the meeting, as is our custom, we will commence with a land acknowledgement. Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that the land upon which we're undertaking our revitalization efforts is part of the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. In addition, Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that Toronto has historically been a gathering place for many Indigenous people, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat people, and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples today. So moving on, our first agenda item is the motion to approve the meeting agenda.
So moved,
May
Wendy.
I please have a motion to approve the meeting? Is that Raul first?
So moved.
Thank you. Seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Andrew. Any discussion? Okay, moving to item number 3, declaration of the conflict of interest. Do we have any conflicts of interest? None declared. We can now move on to the business of the meeting. Thank you. So item number 4, the consent agenda. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the open session of the September 9th, 2021 meeting. May I please have a motion to approve the September 9th, 2021 open session minutes? Is there a mover?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Andrew. Seconder?
Happy to second. It's Rahul.
Thank you, Raul. So moved. Okay, next item is the HR report. Rose, our VP of Human Resources, is going to give us an update on human resources, and I'm sure all committee members have noted that the form of the reporting has changed for this quarter to include a dashboard. And these changes have been in the works for some time and are consistent with some previous comments from the committee. And I'm sure Rose and her team would welcome any feedback. Also reporting this quarter, in accordance with our approved work plan, includes some reporting of some of the guidelines that we have in place for employees of the corporation. So Rose, over to you.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning, everyone. For those who have only received emails from her and have not actually met her, I would like to introduce Kaylee Richardson. She's our HR manager and the other half of our small but mighty HR team. So Kaylee, welcome to your first HR GSR meeting.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
I'll take the HR report as read, and however, I would like to highlight some of the efforts that we've made over the last quarter. I would like to start, as Wendy mentioned, with the introduction of our first ever HR dashboard. Charmaine, can you please bring up the slide? Thank you. As Wendy said, we've been working on KPIs and we're happy to present our first dashboard. I'll quickly go over the 4 KPIs we've selected to present and want to just note that the presentation is based on fiscal years and the numbers in each box under the fiscal year represents the annual averages. So we could start at the top left quadrant, employee work-life balance. By measuring average vacation days taken per employee, we can see that employees took more time off in Q1 and Q2 of this fiscal year as compared to the same time last year, which ironically was the start of the pandemic. For some reasons for the big increase of vacation time taken this summer was likely due to the reopening of the province, more people getting vaccinated, lower COVID cases, and high vacation carryover amounts. This reflects that staff are taking time to take care of themselves and their mental health. We hope to see the numbers continue to trend upwards in Q3 and Q4, which will continue to indicate a stronger work-life balance this fiscal year. Moving over to the top right quadrant, employee well-being, commitment, and motivation. By measuring average sick days taken per employees, we can see that sick time has taken a downward trend since the start of the pandemic. Some reasons for the decrease in sick time include being isolated at home with less interaction with others outside of our circle, thus less likely to catch illnesses, as well as having the flexibility of working from home when you're not feeling 100% allows employees some downtime when required. This indicates a high commitment and motivation as well as strong employee well-being. Moving over to the bottom left quadrant, employee satisfaction. By measuring voluntary employee turnover, we see voluntary turnover trending downwards at the end of fiscal 1920, when the pandemic started, and in fact falling to 0% in Q1 of fiscal year 2021. Since then, it's steadily peaked back up, and we're seeing higher numbers since Q3 of last year. This is in line with the trend hitting the market known as the Great Resignation, which is a backlog of resignations from the pandemic when many employers had hiring freezes and employees felt safe staying put versus moving on. Although we are trending upwards in Q1 and Q2 of this year, our overall 5-year average is 10.9, which is fairly healthy. We hope that following the Great Resignation, we will see turnover drop down to be more in line with previous years. And finally, let's move over to the bottom right quadrant, employee development. By measuring learning and development spending and usage, we see that following the revision of our learning and development guideline in Q1 of this fiscal year, there has been an increase in the average dollar spent on training, learning and opportunities, and a slight increase in the number of employees participating in the program, which is available to all staff. These numbers only include employee and manager initiated learning and exclude mandatory training such as cybersecurity and the Indigenous cultural safety training, just to name a couple. We see that more employees are developing their skills and managers are very supportive. Another reason for the slight increase could be the result of discussions had during our Planning for Success meetings, identifying learning opportunities for development for staff. We will continue to promote learning and development programs and hope that we will encourage employees to develop their skills and hopefully see an upward trend continue in Q3 and Q4. We will update these KPIs and report back on quarterly meetings and look forward to your feedback. I can go through the rest of the report, or I'm happy to take questions now on the KPIs, whatever you'd like.
Thank you, Rose. Do the committee members have any questions? Raul?
Thank you, Wendy. And I've actually got 3 questions, and I'll leave it to you to whether I do them all in sequence or you want to go around to my other colleagues as well. But first of all, I want to say, Rose, great job on the dashboard. It's really helpful. You know, the narrative is good, but having a visual is good, and it's something we can track over time. So congratulations on that. My first question has to do with just around the vacations. So, I mean, many of us are seeing the same things in our workplaces, that we've got folks who simply aren't taking vacation time. So it's a good thing to track because it's important. And I know you're doing this and under George's leadership to ensure that people are aware that they need to take their vacation. If you're not going anywhere, it's tough, but it's really important that they unplug. The other consequence, though, is on the balance sheet, there's also an accrual that is growing in terms of vacation pay here. And I'm wondering if you've got any comments on that, or perhaps we can just sort of table that. I'd be interested to know if that's going to have any material impact compared to past years.
I don't believe there's going to be a material impact.
Yeah, maybe I can
sure.
jump in. Rose, correct me if
yeah.
We rarely pay out. We do pay out a few employees who've accumulated, and we do have a couple that have accumulated quite a bit because we've had some turnover in the areas and they've been not taking their vacation. So we're going to staff up in those areas, procurement being one, and some of the finance. But most people use up their carryover eventually, and the intent is to try to encourage that. And Raul, as he pointed out, you know, I've indicated that we want people to take their vacation. You know, people are reluctant because they are restricted in the things they can do, but at the same time, they've indicated to me they're tired and burnt out, and that's why they need to take the vacation. So I don't think we'll see a large accrual. And we will probably pay out 1 or 2 employees who've accumulated so much that we probably need to pay them out rather than ask them to carry over again.
And George, just to follow up on that, do you require that that staff utilize their carryover in the following quarter? So is it a use it or lose it anywhere in here?
They can carry over 1 year of vacation to the next year. And then after that, they lose it unless, they put an argument forward for me for an exception.
And there's less than 7 people right now, Raul, that are at sort of that cusp of potentially losing some days. And Kaylee and I constantly remind people, hey, we're coming up to the end of the year, use your days or you will lose them. So in the last 20 years, we've rarely had a problem. And as George said, we've only had to pay out 1 or 2 people.
Great. Well, maybe my last comment on the vacation would be, I hope management team is modeling the utilization of vacations, right? Everybody needs a break, and if you're doing it, they'll do it. And if you're not, they won't.
We're definitely trying.
We're trying, I have to say. We're doing our best, but I might be on that list of carrying over, so.
I didn't want to say that, but.
Be warned, George, trying's not good enough. You got to take.
After him.
I know.
Okay, second one, if I may, Wendy?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, on the turnover part, the voluntary employee turnover, good to know what the numbers are. My question has to do with filling the roles. So you've got some turnover, you've got some openings here. Are you seeing any wage inflation? So you would have made some projections around on budget at the beginning of the year in terms of the HR side here. Now that you've got this turnover and you've got some new openings, are you seeing wage inflation on the new hires?
Not really, Raul. We're finding, first of all, there's a lot of great interest in coming here. So that's never been a problem, is attracting the talent to Waterfront Toronto. We are very much in line with our salaries to the market. We weren't years ago, and I'm happy to go into that in the in-camera session because some of the information is sensitive. We're in line and we've not had issues. We've realigned some of the positions that have become vacant. For example, a PM may have left the role and the hiring manager wants to elevate it to a senior PM because that's the need for the role. So in that situation, there's slight impact on budget. But overall, for the HR budget for 21-22, as Lisa can attest to, we will have savings this year. And some of that has to do with the time to backfill the role.
Yeah, I would point out a couple things, Raul. One is, and I may have mentioned this in a previous board meeting, but for the new members, I held off in filling vacancies because we were waiting for the strategic review to identify what our mandate would be going forward. And the hope was to leave me flexibility to hire according to what I need for the future. That process has been delayed in terms of the government reviews. So I will be filling those vacancies because we can't wait any longer. Now, we're adding a couple of staff as well because as we reported in our internal audit, one of the audits that we did that was to look at what our needs are for the future. And clearly we have some immediate needs, cybersecurity being one of them in the IT area. We need more HR support as we get into diversity in some of the other areas. Procurement is a challenge. I would say not on the wage inflation, but there are some areas, when I talk to my colleagues in other sectors, everybody's looking for good procurement people. I think we're going to face some shortage, which ultimately may lead to inflation eventually. But right now, as Rose said, that hasn't been a problem, and people come to work for Waterfront Toronto, not necessarily just for the compensation, but for the value of what our mandate is. So I think, we will be pressing, and we're going to the farm committee with additional funding that we need to hire up the additional staff. But we've had major savings over the last few years because we've had some turnover that we have not filled in terms of positions. So we've more than offset through savings any additional funding that we need for the future. I think that's correct, right, Lisa?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Okay, Wendy, last question, moving on to the last one.
Go ahead.
Okay, I've been following the return to work that you've been undergoing there. The 1 day a week, now the 2 day a week and the sort. And we know that the go forward is going to be some sort of a hybrid plan of some sort in terms of the return to the workplace. Can you kind of walk me through your thinking a little bit there? And more particularly, are you doing or have you done any employee surveys around this? And if you're doing some surveys, are you going to bring those to the committee so we can sort of have a look at that with you?
Yeah, not necessarily a survey. What we have done is we use our workplace, the safety committee, which Rose and Joint Health and Safety Committee, to bounce ideas off, to get feedback from staff, and to get feedback, quite frankly, from each of the units. We also have benchmarked, we get questions from our government partners who make their announcements and want us to try to replicate as much as possible. So we have slowly brought people back, as Raul, you pointed out. We started with senior management, and then we moved to 1 day a week. We're now at 2 days a week. We have informed our staff, just from a planning purpose, that we will stay at 2 days a week till at least after the March break, to give people some stability as to knowing we're not coming back full time for a while. We've been working very productively, but the other thing we learned is there is a lot of anxiety of staff coming back. Once they're back, they start to realize how important that interaction is. So I haven't gotten a lot of pushback on coming back. Obviously, those people who have the largest commutes would probably like to come back less than more. But so far, I haven't heard a lot of negative feedback. The biggest issue we've had is and I'll just declare there's some IT issues here that we're working on, because as people come back, we need to make sure the IT is up and running again. But I think we're going to have a hybrid long term. We're going to reassess as we go through. But right now, I think 2 days a week is practical. Where we have other needs, as projects require a little more in-person time, we may come back 3 days 1 week. I've been in 3 days some weeks, and then, some weeks in the winter, we may just say, look, the weather's too bad. You can work from home this week and maybe drop down to a day a week. So we're trying to be both practical and flexible.
George, I just suggested you said design hybrid and what it could look like going forward. And I think it's a great idea to think about it like that. You might want to consider an employee survey along the line, just to get a baseline and a little bit of a handle on what the employees are actually thinking. But I'll leave that to you. Yeah.
And I think the other part of that, to be honest, is not just employees, but our stakeholders, because they're anxious to get more interaction, in-person interaction. So it's trying to balance all of that. But I think, Raul, that's a good suggestion for us to look at in the future. I do want to declare we started and benefited from the fact we did a remote work pilot just prior to the pandemic, which put us actually in very good stead with regards to dealing with the pandemic. But it was always our intent to look at modernizing how we work. And we're going to have to really think about that, because we will be renegotiating our lease for space, and we're going to have to think about what our space looks like in the future.
When's the lease come due?
It's May 2023, so there's about 18 months left. We've just engaged Avison Young, who are to do a workplace strategy, as well as to either negotiate a new lease or renew the lease.
Sounds like a survey could be very helpful in guiding a little bit of your forward thinking there. Great, good to hear. Thank you, Wendy. That's it.
Thank you, Raul. Very good. Paul, you have some questions?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Someone said there was a salary survey done. I'd like to better understand that and how the salaries compare to market. I don't know when it was done, if it's up to speed or not. What is the best way to go about that?
So I think we might, well, you can probably talk in generalities right now, or do we want to talk about that in camera?
We should probably talk about that in camera if that's possible.
So Paul, we'll come back to that later in the agenda then?
In the closed session?
The closed session, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
And Paul, do you have any other questions?
No, that was it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'll just
Any other
finish.
questions from the committee or board members for Rose and George?
And I'm
Okay, so
happy
back
just-
to you, Rose.
Thank you, Wendy. And Raul, thank you for your question about the return to workplace plan. It was a great segue into my next section. So I won't repeat exactly what George has said, but I'm happy to say that as our gradual return to the workplace started, it's, as George said, it's working out very well right now. We're all at 2 days a week. We will be till mid-March. As you all may know, we did institute a mandatory vaccine requirement for us to come back, for all staff to come back to the workplace. also for guests to come into the office. And I'm happy to report that as of today, we're 98% fully vaccinated in our staff complement. We continue to adhere to safety protocols by wearing masks in common areas when required, allowing for physical distancing in meeting rooms. I don't know if you can actually see, but there are actually gaps between our tables in this room. All the rooms have been set up with maximum capacities. And of course, we will continue to monitor COVID cases and take direction from public health. And as George said, we're working very closely with Joint Health and Safety Committee, which is led by David Costern, our Chief Project Officer. Thank you, David, for your guidance. Moving along to DE&I, M&P has been selected through a full procurement process to be our consultants to work with to assess, create, and implement a DE&I program. Work has begun on a communication strategy and the identification of stakeholders on the board, senior management team, internal and external, to help us form a clear view of our current state, which is critical to informing the work in creating our strategy. In fact, some of you in this meeting have been identified as stakeholders, and you'll soon be receiving an email from George advising of the what, the why, and with whom, and you will also be contacted shortly thereafter by M&P for individual interviews. We want to focus on 3 areas during this program, and George, please correct me if I get this incorrect. We want to identify our metrics and assess our current baseline to get an accurate snapshot of our team now. This is important information as a starting point. We also want to reach out and engage with the community members and the public from all backgrounds. Who are those voices that we haven't heard from yet? And 3, we want recommendations to improve on the first 2 areas and also on how to start a pipeline pool of diverse candidates for senior management roles. We will continue to report back on our progress on DE&I. Now, with respect to our HR guidelines, Charmaine, can you please bring up the HR guideline listing?
Okay. Maybe you just want to ask Wendy if there's any questions.
Oh, sure. Are there any questions on DE&I?
Any questions from the committee or board members that are joining us today?
So Wendy, the only thing I would add is, as Rose indicated, we will do some sampling. So there will be, I think, 4 board members, a couple new board members, a couple existing that will be asked to participate in the survey. We'll also be sampling some of our stakeholder groups. So you may get, well, the individuals will get an invite in the next few days to participate.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll be really quick here to finish up. So in front of you, you see our listing of our 37 corporate HR guidelines. And I just want to start by advising them many, many years ago, we made the decision to not use the word policy, but rather use the word guideline as a softer approach that outlines boundaries, accountabilities, acceptable and non-acceptable conduct within the workplace and externally when representing WT. These guidelines have been created and revised as needed. We recognize that many of these guidelines have been created many years ago and are due for review and update. We are undertaking to review and update 3 to 4 guidelines each fiscal year, as well as create any new guidelines that become necessary during time or by legislation. In fiscal 2021, we revised and updated 7 guidelines, and in conjunction with other departments, created 2 new guidelines. As mandated, we will continue to update this committee on corporate HR guidelines on an annual basis. And again, happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Rose?
Wendy, quick question here.
Yes, go ahead.
So it's very robust. That's a good thing. The other side is 37 policies or guidelines. That's a lot. And if everybody's deemed to understand this, you know where I'm going, nobody really reads this or really understands it. So I'm just curious to know, as you go forward into a new regime of guidelines or a new process, you know, do you think there's a way to, you know, to sort of truncate this, a way to make it meaningful in the onboarding process so people just don't roll their eyes back? Because obviously people aren't going to be consulting this to really guide them. That's just not the way it typically works in the workplace. So just love to get your thoughts on that, Rose, on what you'd like. What does good look like for you going forward?
Well, thank you, Raul. I definitely would, Kaylee and I will definitely think about that. I can't say that part of the onboarding, staff are introduced to this list. They're also directed to an employee site where they can view all of them. For example, there are certain guidelines on this list that our actual an audit requirement. We've made it an audit requirement for people to review annually and sign back, such as the code of conduct, the computer use guideline, to remind people that they're there, what is acceptable and non-acceptable conduct. And some of them we've reminded people about as we're updating them. For example, we just updated the parental leave, where there was a benefit to staff, and when we created these, remember everyone, I'm older than the furniture here. When we created it 20 years ago, we basically went with the times then and what our government partners were doing. Since then, we've updated it. For example, we used to top up 85% for a minimum of 17 weeks. Now we're topping up to 93% for a maximum of 34 weeks for the person giving birth, and for the other parent only for 17 weeks. Much more in line with our government partners, where we didn't have that before. So it was an added benefit to our team. As we update the guidelines, we definitely promote it internally. We bring people to our site. But you're right, a lot of these also, Raul, are just common practices that we wanted to paper based on audit recommendations.
So Raul, I mean, your point is well taken. And one of the things we did do is, first of all, and this goes back to doing a market comparison, for example, on the benefits as much as just salary. When we looked at our benefits, we were way behind all three of our partner governments. So what we did is we said, okay, we're going to catch up, but we went to the lowest common denominator of the three. So when we say we're catching up, we're just hitting the lowest of the three levels of government and what they're offering. So we're still below what I would say the median market is in terms of our benchmarking. What we did do, and our staff were still grateful of, because we were way behind with regards to some of these things, we provided training for all staff, an open house, and walked them through all of it. So it's not just putting a manual in front of them. We actually took time to walk everybody through all the guidelines and take questions. So I do think we might want to look at how we can more effectively communicate that, and whether they're thematic, we can consolidate some of these things. So there's not 37, but under certain themes. So I think it's a good point, but I think we're doing a very good job at trying to make sure people understand what those guidelines are, what their benefits are, and what we're doing to both on the HR side, not just compensation, but one of the biggest issues that we have is people are overworked. So we need to fill all those vacancies. So I think, all these things, we have a lot of dialogue with staff to make sure we're communicating both ways.
It's certainly a journey.
It is. Thank you for that recommendation, Raul. We'll definitely look at it.
So thank you, Raul. And any further questions for Rose on the corporate HR guidelines? Okay, thank you very much. Any more to your presentation, Rose?
No, that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. And the dashboard is very helpful. It's great to see some of these pieces being revised and updated. And I think Raul's recommendation for taking a look at how some of this could be categorized just in order to increase communication would be a great benefit as you start to move forward as well. Okay, so we're moving to item number 6 on the agenda. And we would have a motion to go into the closed session. May I now have a motion to go into the closed session to discuss items number 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 of today's agenda?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Raul.
Happy to second.
Thank you. So moved. I want to remind everyone that any resolution considered in the closed session needs to also be passed when the meeting returns to open session. Okay, thank you very much. We've now returned to the open session and have resumed the recording of the session. May I please have a motion to approve the September 9th, 2021 committee meeting closed session minutes? Is there a mover?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor, contrary? Okay, so we now have concluded. So having concluded the business of the meeting, I now ask for motion to adjourn the meeting. Is there a mover?
Happy to move it.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Happy to second it.
Thank you very much, Joe. Okay, I now declare the meeting terminated. I thank everyone for their participation today, and I hope each of you remain healthy and safe, and I look forward to seeing everyone at the December board meeting, if not before. Thank you very much, everyone.